Welcome to this week's Leading with Purpose podcast. This week, I'm absolutely delighted. We've got Professor Ruth Sutton with us. She's got a really crucial role at the University of Chester. She heads up the School of Law and Social Justice, and it has been doing some fantastic work on driving social mobility. Ruth's been part of our Breaking Down Barriers to Law project, working with regional law firms. It's brilliant to have you on the podcast today, Ruth. I guess probably we should start off talking a little bit about the University of Chester. I was up visiting the law school when it opened in its new site, but it's right next to the law courts, isn't it?
It is. We are literally in the same building. Our door is in the same building in the magnificent Crown Court at Chester. Very grand entrance. So we're right
And it's
next door
seen
to the
some
Crown
amazing
Court.
cases over the years, hasn't it? That Crown
It
Court.
has.
It's done some big ones.
It has indeed. The Moors murders is one of the cases that was heard there, which people might know about, but there have been lots of others as well. The Benjamin Mendy case was there recently as well, and some of the more recent cases that people will have heard about. We're also right next to the magistrates court, so that it's wonderful for the students to be in what is, we don't really have a legal quarter in Chester, but we call this the legal quarter because we've got the courts so close to us, and all the chambers and solicitors firms are very close as well. It's fantastic for the students.
And it's just such a great environment for them to be studying law in, because
Absolutely.
they are literally right next to where it's all happening, and presumably just the whole feel of the place just is very authentic.
Really authentic. They do pop in and out, which is lovely. They pop in and out of the Crown Court, and the judges, and particularly the Recorder of Chester, Judge Everett, are really helpful with the students. We have law students and policing students within my school, and he and the other judges are always very happy to see them in the courtroom. And if they get the chance, they will after the case is finished, or when there's a break, they'll speak to the students for 15 minutes or so, which is absolutely fabulous opportunity for the students. And just talking about the environment, I think that in terms of some of the things we're going to talk about around social mobility for students who come to Chester, it's really important that they get used to being in this kind of environment, the courtroom, and the majesty of the courtroom and the court environment and the building that we're in, because in very many cases that our students are first in family, or that they are the first in their family to come to university, and law in itself is full of grandeur and pomposity and it can be quite overfacing for students who don't know anything about that side of things. An important and lovely environment, I would say, for students to get to know.
Sounds a bit like Parliament. I remember turning up and it's got so many just traditional bits of the day that you have to learn. But at the beginning, you are kind of thinking, what on earth is all this about? And it can feel quite exclusive. And it's just a lack of familiarity. I mean, once you get there, actually, you start to understand why it makes the place special. But I think it's just getting over that initial lack of familiarity. And of course, for Chester students at the law school, this is something that they're doing right the way through. And in a way, I guess it just makes the whole course feel much more applied, because they can literally go and start to see, the practice of law for themselves next door, basically, can't they? Which is amazing.
And that kind of marries up with some of the other activities that we do outside of the curriculum. So, for example, mooting, which, as you may know, is practicing your advocacy in what is like an appeal court, so where you go and argue points of law in front of a judge. We have an internal mooting competition, and Judge Everett and the other judges help us, which is brilliant. They help us with the mooting practice. They give real feedback to the students, which is really valuable.
I mean, literally from the horse, well, not literally from the horse's mouth, but the legal horse's mouth.
Absolutely. It's also very helpful for us because they help us craft the problems as well that we give to the students, so we know they're relevant, that we know they're real issues, the relevant issues that the students are arguing. A couple of years ago, you can only go every couple of years, that then resulted in our students going down to London and mooting in front of the Supreme Court in London, which is
amazing.
absolutely fabulous opportunity for them. And to see, I didn't go with them, and some of my colleagues went, because it was an opportunity for them as well to go to the Supreme Court. And, that part of my role is looking after the students, but it's also making sure that the staff have these kind of opportunities as well if they haven't had them before. And so my colleagues went with them. The photographs and the recorded the recordings that we got back, it just, for a start, it makes you feel really proud that the students have this ability. I don't think I had it at their stage. I don't think I ever had the opportunity to go and stand in front of a judge in my first year of university and argue a case. But to have that opportunity to go and to moot, to do advocacy, hone their advocacy skills in front of the boroughs, was just amazing for them. And they were helped by the judges in Chester too. They were trained by the judges in Chester. So just brilliant opportunities for them that they might not have elsewhere.
And I know you talked about the journey you had, and you'd have jumped at the chance to get down to the Supreme Court or do some of the things the Chester students do. I mean, I guess, Ruth, it probably is fair to say that most people don't go to school thinking, I know I'm going to maybe run a law school when I get older as a career. What was your journey into, well, first of all, I guess into law? What drove you into law? And then I think the switch into actually creating more lawyers. There's two phases, I guess, to your career, aren't there, really?
Yes.
At least two phases.
At least two phases. That's right. Well, there's a lot of detail in how I came to be where I am, so I'll try and keep it short as possible. I know we're talking about leading with purpose, but a lot of I think a lot of where I am is through design eventually, but through luck and accident as much as anything else.
Being in the right place at times.
Being in the right place at the right time. So my career started out as a barrister in Manchester. There's a big question around how did I get there, because if you look at me on paper, I look like I come from a traditional privileged background in terms of being private school educated, ending up doing a law degree at the University of Manchester, and then going to bar school and getting a pupillage and becoming a barrister at the age of 22. And I think this also builds into to some of the discussions around social mobility. I went to a private school not because I came from a privileged background, but in fact my grandparents were they were shopkeepers and market traders in Manchester and Doncaster. So my mum's but she's not from mining stock, but from the mining area of Doncaster. And I grew up, we were all right, but I wouldn't have said we were well heeled when I was growing up. But then my dad started to work for a company that paid for private education, and so I was lucky enough at that stage to go to a private school. And I think that opens up all sorts of privileges for children to go, and I've seen it myself. I was very lucky to have had that route through, and I didn't have any intention of becoming a lawyer. I was a linguist. I did French and Spanish A levels and economics.
Very good choice.
Absolutely. My son's now doing economics, so that's good. So I had no intention of being a lawyer, but then I was involved in an accident. I don't need to go into the circumstances of that, but I needed to have medical care for an injury to my eyes, and the company that my dad worked for, their solicitor or their in-house lawyer dealt with getting me the care that I needed for my eye. And so that's when my networking started, and I was about 15 at the time, and he said, why don't you come and see if you want to be a lawyer, come and work, come and have some work experience.
You were interested in how he navigated the system and managed to get this really positive outcome that for you was clearly going to make a big difference.
Massive difference to me. So I went and I worked in there. It was a brilliant opportunity. And I don't think I would be where I was now if I hadn't been given that opportunity and I hadn't seen what lawyers do in practice at that time. And my teachers at school were like, oh, law's a really dry subject. Why would you bother going into law? And actually, they were lovely teachers, but they're really wrong, because law's not dry at all, because it's about people.
Exactly.
It's about people, and it's about humans. So, which again will come up later on, I think, in what we'll talk about. I went to University of Manchester, did my LLB in Manchester, and at that time I didn't know you had to choose between. I had no idea. I didn't know any lawyers. None of my family were lawyers. I wasn't well connected, and I went to a careers talk in my second year at university, and one of the female lecturers stood up and she said, "You've got to choose now." I don't know why we had to, but you've got to choose now whether you want to be a solicitor or a barrister. And let me tell you, a barrister is no place for a woman. And that was me. That was my choice. That was me done. I was going to do it, because if somebody told me it was no place for a woman to do something,
Yeah.
I was like, well, you know, no way. So I didn't even look into it any further. I knew I had to get a 2-1 to get into bar school, which was in London in those days. And I worked hard, and I managed to get myself into bar school, which was wonderful. I took out a career development loan because I had to live in London.
Yeah,
at the time.
expensive.
Very expensive, and I had to pay for bar school.
You know, a big step to take.
Yes,
To think
absolutely.
I'm gonna shell out, basically, and I have to pay it back, but I'm gonna go for it.
Yep. And then I went through bar school. On the first day of bar school, it was all in London at that point. Somebody stood up to talk about the rugby team and said, this was in 1994, by the way. No, 1993. Gentleman. And that was his opening comment, and started to talk about the rugby team. And I thought, well, here we go. I'm going to stick this one out. And then I managed to get myself a pupillage, which again was very difficult. It wasn't easy to do. Pupillage is when you train to be after university and after bar school.
And it's the key thing, isn't it? Because it's where so many aspiring barristers end up falling down, not finding a pupillage.
And in my day, you could take an unpaid pupillage. They didn't have to pay for pupillages, and so I took an unpaid pupillage in Manchester. I knew I wouldn't survive in London on an unpaid pupillage. I'm very glad I did, because I work in Chester. I live in Manchester now, and have my family were from, as I said, from Manchester and Doncaster originally. And I took it from there. And I was lucky that I was doing that in the late 90s, because I managed to buy myself a house very early on, because it was pre-housing boom. So I was fortunate. Again, by luck or by design, I was fortunate in buying a house early on, before the housing boom, and I could pay off my debts by adding them into my mortgage. Those opportunities are not really available to young people today.
Which is the crazy thing, isn't it, Ruth? Because I'm similar. I got on the housing ladder as fast as I could, and it was, again, just before the housing boom. And there's so many issues around social mobility, but I do know I couldn't make my journey today. I could work as hard, but I wouldn't get I put the effort in, but I wouldn't get the reward. And I just think that's got to be wrong, hasn't it?
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
You know, one generation, you know, you can kind of really go for it, but you can see what you get on the back of that. But I think, you know, it's so hard now, isn't it? It's a really different ballgame.
And also, you know, when I talked about my career development, and I think it was £15,000. And young people are coming out of that. That was me qualified as a barrister at £15,000. Young people are coming out of university with £30,000 worth of debt.
But I guess 15,000 in the late 90s is still actually a lot of money as well.
Well, a lot of money, but I could roll it up into my mortgage and paid it off. I was lucky that I didn't have to take a student loan, apart from the career development loan side of things. And that paid for it. Was a lot of money, but it also covered my cost of my education. And I could take I was fortunate that I could take an unpaid pupillage because I lived at home with my mum.
So you're getting on with this career. You sort of, as you say, get the pupillage, become a barrister, and then what happens? You, at some stage, do a shift, don't you? Into academia and education.
Well, the part of it that I missed out is that I'd always been involved in education as well, all along the way. My mother, was an education professional from a very. She started out as a secretary in a professor's office, and then she became heavily involved in FE colleges, and ended up very, very high up in the FE world. But that meant that I was involved in the education of FE students because I worked in the colleges as when I was at university, and I worked in the advice and guidance centre, and I had always been involved in that side of education. And when I was waiting for a pupillage, because the timing was just a little bit off, he was teaching. I grew up in Birmingham, and I went in to do sessions, particularly for, in those days they were kind of tea groups for
Mm-hmm.
Indian women.
Mm-hmm.
In those days it was Indian women
Mm-hmm.
who would come in to have tea, but they would also come in to talk about human rights.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of my role, was to have tea and talk human rights with the Indian ladies. And also I was working in kind of doing law modules for accountants at the local
Yeah.
colleges, you know, those kind
Okay.
of things. So I'd always been interested in education. And then in the kind of late 90s, the training for the bar moved out of London,
Mm-hmm.
and I was involved in helping to secure the first bar school in Manchester. My chambers was involved in
Right.
it, and so I became
Okay.
interested in higher education at that
Okay.
stage.
Right.
I'd been working as a barrister in family law practice, and I was always interested in kind of the social justice aspect of law, so
Mm-hmm.
criminal law,
Mm-hmm.
family
Yep.
law. Private life, I met an Australian man who is now my husband, still my husband. So I left the
That's a
bar.
relief.
It is a relief, yeah. I left. I'd always been involved in this very high pressured bar world, and very, you know, the cases were quite serious and significant working at the
Yes.
family bar.
Yeah.
And so I decided to have a break, and I went off to Australia, and I requalified as a solicitor in Australia. And then when I
Mm-hmm.
came back, I decided that I'd like to pursue the education side of things. So I went into
Gotcha.
higher education. At that point, that's 25
Mm.
years ago now. So
Wow.
went through the ranks, really. I've never
Amazing.
been a research heavy person. I'm not saying that researchers aren't doers, but I'm a doer. I get on with
Yeah.
teaching and learning.
Yeah.
And my passion, as you'll be aware, is actually helping students to fulfill their potential, from wherever they start, the kind of transformative
Mm.
power of education, from whatever position of advantage or disadvantage students come from.
And in a sense, law is fundamentally about equity
Well, it
and
should be, yes.
fairness and access
Yes,
to, you know, the
yes,
same rules, whoever you are. For the students that are coming to Chester, I've met some of them, you know,
they're
just
great.
fantastic talent.
Yes.
What kind of inequalities do you see them grappling with? You know, I guess it takes different forms. You know, it might be finance, advice, but for today's students, where do you think the challenges are that they're having to overcome if they want to, you know, get on with a career, even though they may start again, as you did, as I did? Yeah, I never met a lawyer, but they might be from a family with no legal background. In fact, probably most people are.
Yeah. I think that student life is very different to how it was. The student life that I had, the student life that I would think many people of my generation think about, and possibly even the next generation along think about, student life is very different now. It's much harder, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the content that students learn is much harder, but I think
Mm-hmm.
actually the fact of living as a student is much harder. And
Yeah.
we're seeing lots more students commuting to university because of the
Mm-hmm.
cost of living,
Mm-hmm.
because of, and as I mentioned, you know, that the paying of fees and the pay, but actually just living is much harder for young people to pay for. So
Yeah.
if you live out of home, paying your rent and being able to, I mean, students were always thought of as being underprivileged, because, you know, the typical students when I was at university were thought of as underprivileged. But I do think it's harder for students, and we see that in the
Yeah.
students at Chester who I mentioned the wording before, first in family. They often come from a postcode, and this is used in student statistics. They often come from a postcode where lots of the students are first in family, and that is a measure of disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come from a local postcode. They're traveling into university. Why are they traveling in? Why are they commuting to university? Because the cost of living makes it very difficult for them to live out. One of the things is the cost of living that makes it very, very difficult for them to live out of home. The other side of it is that home, for my students, they might not be living with parents or carers. They might actually be the parents or carers, and they're young.
Yeah.
They're young parents or carers. So they don't have that same living away from, they don't have the means to live away from home, and they don't have the time and space to live away from home. So they their lifestyles are very different to what we might think of as the traditional student.
Yeah.
So it's about being able to arrange their time, and it's not their lack of time management skills that's an issue. It's the fact they have to have different time management skills, different money management skills. And we have to be aware of that in the way that we program courses that gives them the opportunities that other students who live away from home, who also have to work, I'm not denying that at all, but who live away from home, who don't have the responsibilities that my students have, that have time to do extracurricular or co-curricular activity that my students simply don't have the time to do and haven't had the opportunity to do in the first place.
And so how are you, I mean, I know that there's an awful lot that goes on with the law school, but what are some of the things you do to make sure that, almost irrespective of that circumstance, people are getting what they need really to develop as future lawyers?
So it's really interesting, and the interesting point is how we've developed it as much as anything else. So we do some wonderful work in the communities. We do pro bono activity, which really splits into two. So lots of people will have heard of legal advice clinics, which is basically where legal advice is given to clients. So we do have legal advice clinic activity, but we also have other clinic activity, which is project-based work. And some people talk about street law, but we talk about community-based projects where our students, we partner with local organisations to hear what the grassroots of the community need from our students. And our students then, they are supervised, but they run projects. So there are student project managers who then manage student volunteers to design the intervention for what the community needs. So it's a bit like social prescribing. So for example, some examples of those projects are we call them reach out activities. So reach out to schools, which is a little bit different to outreach to schools. It's reach out to schools where our students design and go and do enrichment sessions with children who have a particular need for enrichment sessions. So that's both community outreach, but it's also really great for our students to be teaching and helping younger children about human rights or law in practice, or so that the younger children can then see themselves in university and see what law is about for them. So that's one
So the
area that we're looking
students
at.
themselves are, even though they're right at the beginning, they can still be role models, and really credible
Absolutely.
role models for those
Absolutely. Really
younger children
important.
who don't even know what law's all about or why it matters.
Or university even, and I think that there's been research on the fact that the interventions with younger children, it's really important to get into children's schools earlier. So it might be thought that going into schools in year 9 or 10 when children are making their GCSE choices is the time to start raising aspirations. Actually, the research shows that going in year 5 and 6
that's right.
is more key, because children start to make choices about what they want to be by the people that they see around them. So if they see role models, people like them, sometimes the students are going back into their own schools. People like them can go to university and study law at university. We've been doing a little bit of research, it's like a follow-up research, that where we're seeing the same children in year 8, and they're remembering what they've done in year 5, and it's building that memory.
Yeah, I saw some research, Ruth. This is years ago, I think when I was education secretary, but it said that if you were 10 and had decided you thought university was a good thing, you were something like 6 times more likely to end up going there than a child that answered, I don't know, to that question. And that makes complete sense to me, that really maybe it's a bit self-selecting, that actually it's children who are maybe more likely to think, what am I going to do? More driven. But I also think the reality is it's so hard to aim for stuff that you have no knowledge about, no understanding. And for so many of us, actually just showing us that as, younger people can be hugely shaping, because after that, people can find out for themselves, they can get
Yes,
motivated, but it's that spark of inspiration that some of those
absolutely.
meetings triggers that is so powerful, isn't it, for getting lives on track?
Absolutely. And one of the lovely things that we do in this project is, so the students, they plan it all themselves, and they go out, they do the enrichment classes. But at the end of the cycle, we bring the children here to run a little court case in our mock courtroom.
Brilliant.
And then one of them that they've done is should Spider-Man be unmasked? Things that children relate to, but put it
Some
in a
quite
kind of legal
interesting ethical
context.
questions,
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
what
Yeah.
his rights are around that, the community.
Yes.
It's a good debate, isn't it, for
Absolutely.
children?
And then we do a little graduation ceremony for them. So,
Oh.
we have a lovely lecture theatre in this building, which has been, it's quite grand, because this is the old council chambers
Mm-hmm.
building that we're
Mm-hmm.
in. And they literally do the walking across the floor to receive a little certificate to say that they've taken part in the activity. And it's just lovely. You see their faces light up when they walk across. It's almost practicing for graduating a little bit further down the line, and it's wonderful. I mean, that's just one example of the
But it
kind of.
sort of builds up confidence. It's not just
Absolutely.
about a potential career in law. It's finding some confidence around public speaking,
Yes.
around thinking about problems, real questions, how to structure that. It's so much more than just a quick chat about potentially going into law when you get a bit
Yes.
older, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think I mean, I have teenage children myself, and I think what people miss is that the school system starts funneling them into A-level topics when they're doing the GCSEs, and that they make their choices for GCSEs in year 9. So
Mm-hmm.
going into a school in year 10 is late. It's too late. So, well, it's not too late. I mean, it's never too late to change, is it? As we've alluded to, I've made changes in my career a couple of times, but for children and for outreach and for, as you say, role models, people seeing themselves in a role in terms of breaking down barriers,
Yeah.
you know,
And getting that broader representation of
yeah,
talent into the legal profession.
absolutely, absolutely. And as I was saying, many of our students are first in families. They obviously have role models, but they don't have role models they might not have role models who've been to university.
And the role for the profession, I mean, obviously we did that Breaking Down Barriers to Law project. It was great having you and Chester part of that, Ruth.
Thank you.
And that brought together a range of sizable regional law firms. It's easy to think that only the big ones are in London, but there are huge law firms all over. We really systematically worked through breaking down barriers to people. But what's your sense about what more the profession can do around this?
Well, I think that, and I'm going to speak as a lawyer here, so I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
I'm insulting myself as much as anybody else when I say this. I think law stereotypically, and the legal profession stereotypically, is quite slow on the uptake
Mm-hmm.
in terms of societal issues. I don't think individuals are, but I think that the organisations can be. And then all of a sudden that it's recognised, and then there's a bit of wheel reinventing that happens when you
Mm-hmm.
don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think that one of the things that and I'm not just at Chester. I'm now the chair of the heads of university law schools as well.
Mm-hmm.
We when I speak to my membership, we get very frustrated when the profession says you should be doing more of this, and we say,
Yeah.
we do this. Come and
Yeah.
talk to us about what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Your view
Find
of what
out.
happens at in a university is out of date. We don't just do lectures where students sit and then take an exam at the end of it. We build curricula around skills and competencies and skills. And don't miss us out, because I remember saying in one of the meetings that we have connections. You don't need to go and find connections in schools. We have them. Come to us.
Yeah.
It's part of
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
mission. It's
Absolutely.
part of our mission. And I think that that's where the profession is perhaps missing a trick. In a sense, is that it's jump jumping on apprenticeships as the way into
Mm-hmm.
social mobility, and
Mm-hmm.
yet there are institutions like mine which are very, very focused on social mobility. Just come and ask us and we'll help. We've got some answers. I think that's problematic. And I also think, we were talking about role models before, and I looked at some stats before we started the podcast. They're a little bit outdated, but they're from 2021, which shows that in the judiciary, which are really visible, who are really visible in terms of lawyers most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
half of the judiciary, and like this is spanning the whole of the judiciary, half of the judges are white men, a third of the judges are white women, and the rest of the judges are made up of different ethnic backgrounds.
Mm.
I looked at the stats for the Supreme Court bench. I think 11 out of the 30 of the bench are men. The two women on the Supreme Court bench.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the judges in the Superior Court, so that's the Court of Appeal and
Mm-hmm.
the Supreme Court, are white male Oxbridge, people from a white male Oxbridge background. And if you think
Mm-hmm.
about who folk from Oxbridge are, then
Yeah.
how is it that we're trying to train people and we're trying to break down the barriers, and yet when you get to the very
Mm-hmm.
top, it's still very white male private school educated.
And I think the challenge is really around getting in and getting on. And this is what came through the Breaking Down Barrister Law project, which is that I think the profession's genuinely engaged on getting in. But this next massive, and needs to do more on that, let's be absolutely clear. The next really big challenge is getting on, and the
Getting
fact
on.
that actually, particularly the direct legal practices, are losing talent that just heads off into industry to be general counsels, when actually, if it was better structured, could have stayed in and continued a career in practice in the law courts, and steadily started to percolate up into some of those roles that probably are the only lawyers that we really see on our TV screens. And the one final question I've got really for you, Ruth, is around just AI and the fact that tech is just washing through the law profession as it is everything else. Just briefly, what are some of the things on your mind around how that might affect social mobility within law, like what it means
Yeah,
for careers in law going forward?
I think it's a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
AI. I think that there are going to be some great benefits to it in terms of being able to automate
Mm-hmm.
some of the processes that are needed. So taking the things, making lots of laws based on template, boilerplate, precedents, document searching, all those kind of things. So it would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we need to make sure that AI is correct, because there have been 300 cases worldwide of lawyers who haven't who have misquoted judgment in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's it. I think it's all to play for students to come to university to learn how to use AI. That's brilliant, and to use it properly and ethically. However, you need to be able to get to a university situation where you know how to use it, so that you've got to have that opportunity. But also, let's not forget that there is digital poverty. And we assume that everybody has access to the internet. A lot of my students use their phones rather than
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
laptops. We do provide laptops, in terms of loans and things, but there is still some areas of the country which are really digitally deprived. Let's put it that way. There are opportunities, as I say, it's a double-edged sword. There are opportunities, but I think we need to be really careful with how we use it, and that we train people, that people have the right resources and the right opportunities to train to use it properly.
And it's certainly going to be something that we increasingly focus on in the Purpose Coalition. But Ruth, there's definitely a careers and universities piece to all of this. Look, we need to allow you to go, actually, but it's been brilliant having you on the podcast. So Professor Ruth Sutton, Head of Law and Social Justice at the University of Chester, thank you so much for doing this podcast.
It's my pleasure.
It's been brilliant to hear about your journey, but also I think to revitalize that discussion around the importance of law and why it needs to have all of us part of it, not just some of us. So Ruth, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.